this amendment is in the group of 4 that was the subject of the previous unanimous consent. So I look forward to an ongoing debate and a vote on this amendment, hopefully early next week, because we need to start voting on this topic and on amendments to this bill. The amendment is real simple and, in my opinion, very important. It would mandate, finally, that we have an operational U.S. visit system to track visa coming into the country and exiting the country to guard against visa overstays. Now, Mr. President, this is an important part of security and enforcement, but one that's not talked about enough. We always talk about the border, as we should. We often talk about workplace enforcement, as we should. That is extremely important. This is the third leg of the stool that we don't talk about enough, but we need to focus on, because this goes to our national security as well as border security. The 9/11 terrorists all were individuals who came into this country legally with a visa, but what happened? They overstayed their visa by a lot, and they plotted to kill and destroy, which unfortunately they successfully did on 9/11. Because of that, one of the top recommendations of the 9/11 Commission was to implement this visa entry-exit system using biometric data. We call the system that has been developed the U.S. visit system. The problem is full implementation of the U.S. visit system has never come close to occurring, as the 9/11 Commission recommended that it be executed. And so this amendment says simply, we're finally going to do it. We've talked about it for years. We've lived through actual terrorist attacks that go to the heart of this need. The 9/11 Commission has rated it as a top recommendation, so we're finally going to do it. And we're not going to move on to changing the legal status of current illegals in this country under this bill until we do it and until we verify that it's been done. Very simple idea. So, Mr. President, I look forward to a continuing debate on this need, on this amendment, and a vote on this amendment early next week. Secondly, Mr. President, I also wanted to mention a point of order that I will be making on this underlying bill as soon as possible, hopefully also early next week. And the point of order is simple. It is a point of order against the emergency designation provision contained in the bill in Section D1. And it's pursuant to Section 403E of the fiscal year 2010 budget resolution. Mr. President, we all consider spending and debt a big problem in this country, and we put enormous focus and energy and debate and discussion on that issue. The problem is, so often, after we set budget caps, after we set these limits with the very serious spending and debt issue in mind, whenever a big bill comes up, they just bust the caps. We put a so-called emergency designation on the spending, and all of a sudden, like that, with that simple phrase, we exempt that entire bill from the spending caps, from the provisions that we have put in place to try to get spending and debt under control. Mr. President, this immigration reform bill is another example of that, because it would spend $8.3 billion, and it calls all of that spending emergency spending. Now, Mr. President, that is just a sleight of hand. That is just avoiding the caps and the limits that we've tried to put in place to begin to rein in spending and debt. This is not an emergency in any reasonable sense of the term. This is not an unforeseen storm. This is not an unpredicted earthquake. This is not an unpredicted attack on our country from a foreign power. This is a problem for sure, but we have annual spending bills and a whole department of government that's supposed to be about this problem, the Department of Homeland Security. We have an annual Department of Homeland Security appropriation bill. So this is not something unforeseen, a true emergency. And to call this $8.3 billion emergency spending is just a pure sleight of hand to avoid the discipline of the spending caps. Now, Mr. President, at least on my side of the aisle, when this exact same point of order has been made before on many, many other bills, we have upheld it. We have said, you're right, this is a sleight of hand. You're right, this is an end run around those budget provisions. You're right, this is just busting the budget cap by another name. And we should do the same thing here. We should respect the budget law. We should not do an end run around the budget caps. We should not essentially lie to the American people and say this is unforeseen, this is a true emergency, when it's not. So, Mr. President, I'll be raising this very important budget point of order regarding the emergency designation of $8.3 billion of spending in the bill at the earliest possible opportunity when it is in order, and I expect that to be early next week as well. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.